In a world where political systems are constantly evolving and global challenges are becoming increasingly complex, it is natural to ask ourselves, is our current political system enough to best serve the complex needs of our country today? Some argue that democracy is always the best option, but recent events such as the referendums on Scottish independence and Brexit have shown that this is not always the case, as it has left our country more divided than it was before. Instead, some argue that a system based solely on the rule of law, with minimal government intervention, could be the answer. However, there are far too many variables to know for sure, but we are running out of time to make these decisions. There is growing skepticism about the effectiveness of the government-mandated Green Revolution. The UK contributes just 1% of global CO2 emissions, which highlights the need to reconsider the role of government in this issue. Furthermore, as food security becomes increasingly pressing concern, due to conflicts around the world, there is a need for the UK to produce more food, which requires building an energy infrastructure that delivers the cheapest energy possible.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to episode 9 of the Clive Bird Experiment. In this week's episode, we're going to review the book of the week, which is Plato's Republic. We're going to discuss political systems and the transitions from one to the other. We're going to discuss how the Green Revolution is doomed. And we're going to discuss food security. Plato's Republic is one of the most influential works of philosophy in history. Written around 380 BC, the book is a dialogue between Socrates and various Athenian citizens on the topic of justice and the ideal society. This book takes about 12 hours to read. And there are some thought processes throughout the book that are quite hard to follow. But this is totally understandable when you delving into the mind of Socrates, one of the greatest philosophers of all time. The book is divided into 10 books, each containing a discussion on a specific topic, on the formation of the Republic. In Book 1, Socrates and his friends discuss the meaning of justice and whether it is better to be just or unjust. Socrates then begins to develop his argument that justice is not just desirable, but essential for human happiness and a fulfilling life. Socrates then engages in a lengthy dialogue with Thrasymachus on ultimately refuting his arguments that justice is simply a manner or gaining power or self-interest. This discussion leads to the creation of the hypothetical city-state, which becomes the focus of the rest of the book. In books 2 through 5, Socrates and his fellow Athenians discuss the importance of educating the citizens of the city-state, including the virtues that should be instilled in them. Socrates argues that the citizens should be educated in a way that encourages them to pursue knowledge, truth, and the common good, rather than individual self-interest. In books 6 through 7, Socrates describes the ideal society. The ideal society is divided into 3 classes: the ruling class, the auxiliaries, and the producers. The ruling class is made up of philosopher kings, who have been educated in the pursuit of wisdom and knowledge. The auxiliaries are responsible for defense of the city, and the producers are responsible for providing the necessities of life. In books 8 through 10, Socrates discusses the nature of the soul and the afterlife, arguing that the soul is immortal and that it is the duty of the philosopher king to rule the city in a just and wise manner. He also then goes on to describe various types of government and their corresponding virtues and vices. Throughout the book, there is an emphasis on the importance of education, the pursuit of knowledge, and the common good, central to many political and social movements throughout history. Overall, Plato's Republic is a thought-provoking and challenging work that explores some of the most fundamental questions of human existence. It continues to be studied and debated by philosophers, political scientists, and scholars to this day. The Republic discusses the concept of the ideal state, which is led by philosopher kings who are wise and just, and whose primary goal is to promote the common good of the society they govern. One of the key ideas of the Republic is the concept of meritocracy, which means individuals are chosen for positions of power based on their abilities and talents, rather than their social standing and family connections. This philosophy is part of the UK political system, as it promotes equal opportunities for all citizens, as anybody with the right levels of education and experience could move into politics. This could improve further by reforming the education system to provide improved quality education for all, regardless of people's socio-economic backgrounds. In the public, they concluded that the separation of power, which would mean different branches of government should be responsible for different functions. This would help to prevent any one person or group from becoming too powerful and would ensure the decisions are made in a process with checks and balances. In the UK, this could involve dividing up government into different sectors and having specific elections for each of those sectors, ensuring that the best person is elected for the position rather than a political affiliation. This would make governments and politicians more accountable. The Republic promotes the idea of a just society, where everybody is treated fairly and equitably. This is already largely implemented in the UK through policies to promote social justice, such as progressive taxation, free healthcare, and equal pay for male and female workers. Despite what we see in the media today, we now live in a period where people can be who they want to be and are all treated equally without any legal discrimination. However, people are entitled to hold their own beliefs and are entitled to voice their personal prejudices towards others. Overall, the UK has implemented a number of the topics discussed in the Republic into their political system. However, implementing all of these ideas would require significant changes to the current political system and may face resistance from those who benefit from the current status quo. The political system could be much more meritocratic, with an increased focus in the common good of the nation rather than individual interests of the elite. This would allow the country to become more equitable, with policies at reducing inequality and enforcing social justice. Political systems. There are essentially 5 different types of political systems. You have a monarchy ruled by one, you have oligarchy ruled by a group, you have democracy ruled by the people, you have a republic which is ruled by law, and then you have anarchy, which is the absence of government. What we have to realize is in the modern day world, we get told and branded a lot like communism and socialism and nationalism and fascism and totalitarianism and all of the isms. Right? And we all seem to think that they're on left and right ends of the spectrum. However, when you look at all of these isms as part of a political spectrum, they're all government in total power. This is where we are manipulated into follow or believe specific political policies. So this diagram shows the breakdown of the true political spectrum. On the left-hand side, you have monarchy ruled by one, which is usually exists as an oligarchy. Kings and queens, dictators, and all of the isms are essentially in this area, where the government maintains 100% of the power. As we move to the right, the government control gets less and less. You have the oligarchy, which is expansive groups of people, and we see this in today's world where companies like Goldman Sachs, General Electric, and various other large corporations build up affiliations and groups, the WEF, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They essentially use their power and influence to control the political spectrum by funding certain areas of the world's democracies or funding certain branches of political systems to create the need for their services. Democracy, which is ruled by the people. We've seen recently that democracy, we hear all the time that democracy is the most important part of a society. However, democracy is the tyranny of the minority by the majority. Democracy is mob rule. Democracy is expansive government, endless entitlements, which turns eventually into corporatism, which is where we are today in the UK. Everybody knows that government is being manipulated and controlled by big industries like the media, by the WEF. All of these non-governmental organizations are all oligarchies which have money and power to achieve their desired objectives. Republic is ruled by the law. Now, the law constitutes limited government intervention, sound money, peace, prosperity, and liberty. This, to me, is the objective of every government. To have a simple government ruled by law, where the government is not in control of people's lives, however, everybody follows a framework to live. We've discussed the 5 types of government. Essentially, a lot of these governments are just transition governments. So a monarchy, although a monarchy is a supreme power, a dictator is a supreme power, they ultimately always devolve themselves into being oligarchies. The royal family will have their trusted advisors, they'll have their families, they'll have many people that offer them military aid, finance, power to achieve their ultimate goals. And however, all those people would want something in return. So slowly the power goes from the monarchy to the strongest of their supporters, as a monarchy transitions into an oligarchy. Overall, a monarchy can provide stability and continuity over a short time. Over time, it'll lead to a concentration of power and wealth in the hands of a small group of people, leading to the emergence of an oligarchy. Now, anarchy is a form of government which also becomes an oligarchy. An anarchy is a tool for revolutionary change. An anarchy is used to overthrow a democratic government or a republic, and in the confusion, people look to the people that created the anarchy to govern the people. And that starts off then as a new democracy, but ultimately transitions towards an oligarchy. So we can all see that the main means of control on the political spectrum is oligarchy. That is where everything always ends up to. No matter what is done, no matter which stage you're in, oligarchy always seems to end up on top. We just brand it differently in the West. Now, democracy, the majority rule. The flaw in democracy is it's the tyranny of the minority by the majority, which leads to anarchy, caused by government extravagance and pleasing only the majority of voters. The majority not being the people but the financial elite. Democracy is essentially a transition from a republic, ruled by law, to an oligarchy. There are therefore only two permanent types of political systems, the oligarchy and the republic. Everything else is a transitional between one system and the other and is not permanent. If we were to look into UK politics, you would see that it's a select few individuals who are always involved all the time. Those individuals are funded by wealthy oligarchs like the WEF or foundations like the Bill and Melinda Foundation and various other media institutions owned by wealthy individuals, and also massive hedge funds like BlackRock, using their power and their money to create influence, to create political and legislative control over the people, to increase their control over the world. So, like we brand the Russian millionaires as oligarchs, we too have our own Western oligarchs. We just brand them as foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or the WEF, or even hedge funds that control huge, vast sums of money. These all exhibit massive amounts of control over our political system. And with lobbying of governments and forcing governments to get financing to achieve certain outcomes for the business institutes, it shows that the system is well and truly in play. The Green Revolution. This is my question right now. So is the Green Revolution doomed? We need to talk about the immense practical difficulties involved in the Conservatives' 10-point plan for Britain to go carbon neutral by 2050. Make no mistake, it will be impossible to achieve this. And even trying is proving to be catastrophic to the UK economy. And nowhere is this plan more evident than the announcement of the ending sales of petrol and diesel cars by 2030. There are 38.9 million cars, vans, buses and lorry on the road in the UK. We would more likely need to build over 10 million charging points around the country to cope with that demand. Never mind where we would get the resources from to build all these cars. So the idea that we could switch to total electric by 2030 is completely unrealistic. For a start, the minerals used in green technologies far outweighs conventional cars. So conventional cars use tiny amounts of resources, whereas electric cars use up to 10 times more resources than normal cars. And in a day where geopolitical structures are falling and crumbling and there's uncertainty around the world, these valuable minerals like cobalt, zinc, lithium, nickel, copper are going to become incredibly hard to find. The fact that copper, nickel, cobalt and zinc all come from Russia and the East is a very, very troubling position. And we have to ask ourselves, how do we get lithium, nickel, cobalt and zinc? We get these raw materials from open cast mining and mining operations, which use an extreme amount of CO2, which generates an extreme amount of CO2. Now, we don't factor this generation into our statistics. We factor this generation into the countries that are producing these materials. We can see that the green revolution is not necessarily making the planet better. And it's starting to make me think that this is just a financial game to create new wealth and new industry and keep an economy going. The green revolution would mean that we would have to completely upgrade all the electrical wiring in our houses, our streets, our substations, and transmission lines. To meet the demand, we would have to upgrade all our local electricity grids, which we would ultimately all pay for with higher energy bills. If this is really part of the plan, then government must be really honest with who's actually going to pay for all this Who is actually going to foot the bill? Nearly half of UK CO2 emissions come from heating air and water in buildings. 27% are in homes and 18% in all other types of building. Governments also have to be truthful in the areas of solar and wind. If our countries are capable in generating the sufficient power from these new greener initiatives, wind seems to be appropriate for the geographical area of the United Kingdom. Solar is not so good. Yet we're still seeing government subsidies pushing solar when solar is probably the least effective green energy we can provide. Solar in the UK is a very negligible amount of power. You have to have an extremely large solar array to get the required power you need. And this would mean that we would have to change the way we build our houses. We have to change the way planning permission is achieved to ensure that every roof in the country is south-facing and is of the right geometric angles to allow for a maximum amount of solar. The roof space on a typical 3-bedroom house should fit at minimum a 3 kilowatt system. A 4-bedroom house should fit at minimum a 6 kilowatt system. A 5-bedroom house should fit at minimum an 8 kilowatt system. And by doing this, we would slowly build up our infrastructure. However, it would have to change at a construction level because solar is really expensive. And although it's cheap once it's installed and it's a single payoff, it is a very large upfront cost, which people can't necessarily do easily. Now, if you enforced it onto builders and builders were building solar and every new house had solar panels already installed when you purchased it and you spread it over your mortgage but you could offset the saving in your energy bills. This is the area that I'm talking about in the country. This is the area the country needs to go. But it's going to take time. We can't set a timeline. What we need to do is we need to prove it that it's cost effective and viable, and then we need to start implementing it over time. We can't force people to spend a lot of money on energy and create an energy poverty stricken country just to trace green tech. When the government talks about saving the planet, and we stand in Europe talking about how we're going to cut our emissions down to save the planet, I think it's very important that we should look at the actual main generators of CO2 emissions on the planet. This diagram clearly shows all the countries in the world that are major contributors to CO2 emissions. Now, you can see the big players. You've got China, 29%. You've got the United States at 16%. These are the two countries that would have to do the biggest changes to make any difference in the world's CO2 emission. The United Kingdom is at 1%. Us going carbon neutral by 2050 is not going to benefit the planet. It's not going to change anything in the countries that are above 5 should be looking to get down to 2 and 3 to save the world. The UK doing these initiatives to save the environment under the auspices of we need to do our part. Essentially, it's all a load of absolute rubbish because it's not going to change anything in the world. What we should be for rather doing is focusing on helping the countries develop quicker, get to the point where we are, and slowly making green tech more cost effective and more viable than the higher contaminant version. That takes time, that takes engineering, and that's how the world should that's how we should handle these situations. If you look at the UK as a whole, this is where we generate most of our CO2 emissions by sector. Residential is 7%, heating and electricity is 39%, transport is 30%, industry is 11%, and other services are 5%. Now, we can't cut any of these things very easily in the UK. They are fundamental, essential items to create UK life. But even by turning every piece of vehicle transport to electric is still going to not change the energy usage because it's going to go from 30% of transport to 69% electricity and heat because we still need to generate the fuel and the energy to drive the vehicles. So by changing what we do in the UK and by making sure that we have no petrol cars on the infrastructure on the roads by 2030 and all these other things that the government talks about, is not going to change our delivery and our output. We are being manipulated on a huge level by government and oligarchs to create new industry and governments are funneling our money on these government green initiatives to support industries in times of severe economic difficulty. This green revolution has nothing to do with the environment and everything to do with maintaining the current capitalistic nature of the world. The sooner we can acknowledge this and start discussing the real problems that are coming, nothing will get better. The world is going through a change. The world is going hotter. Absolutely. I'm not saying climate change is fake. What I'm saying is the world goes through changes. Egypt, in the times of the pharaohs, was a breadbasket of Africa. It was lush tropical greenery. It's not anymore. Everywhere in the world is changing their temperatures. Some places will become more hospitable, some places will become less hospitable. Food growth will move from one side of the world to the other side of the world, and we'll have to change the way we trade. There might be a huge amount of immigration due to environmental catastrophe. However, with the world's decreasing population in certain areas like China, Russia, Great Britain, Germany, attracting the best people is not necessarily a bad thing. Ultimately, we need to rethink this green revolution. Power security is the primary objective in a modern world. We need to secure gas, oil, coal, solar, wind, nuclear, and hydroelectric power to be used in the United Kingdom. And we need to make that as clean as it is cost effective. Electricity needs to get as cheap as possible, as this will naturally push industries and people to use power, which means people will swap to electric cars, people will swap to electric heat pumps. People will swap if energy becomes cheaper. We're not focusing on the real need. The real need is clean, cheap energy. Now, you won't be able to get all the clean energy you need. You are going to have to use fossil fuels and even coal to get the power and the energy you need. However, the primary objective is energy security. Get energy security, change the way we see energy as it's an important commodity for life. We need to change how we build houses. We need to change how we lay out housing estates. We need to change the way we think. We need to change our prejudices. We need to halt our prejudices towards wind energy and solar energy and nuclear power especially. We need to look at the green alternatives to burning coal for energy, capturing the carbon and resending it back down underground or turning it into a chair or whatever. There must be loads of scientific adaptations we can do, but we're not going to find them unless we create these plants and then push these plants to go as green as financially possible. The green revolution was created to grow economies and create wealth in certain areas, but at the same time it's going to be at the cost of the massive population who will not be able to afford their expensive energy because they're saving the planet. We need to think about this, and we need to make a plan on how we can solve these issues without creating energy poverty. Food security. So food security in the UK is a really interesting subject that I've just started researching. Now, 71% of all land is used for farming. 19% of that land is used for arable crops like wheat and barley. The farming industry creates 400,000 farming jobs every year. Only 1% of horticulture is fruit and veg. And the farming industry contributes 10.7 billion to the UK economy every year. The UK exports about 18 billion pounds worth of food and drink every year. Food is global business. The UK exports to over 200 countries and territories. Our biggest export markets are Ireland, France, and the USA. The EU, which equates to 9.3 billion a year, and all the other countries, all the non-EU countries, equates to 4.3 billion a year. The UK produced 3.5 billion in cereal, 1.2 billion in vegetables, 700 million in potatoes, 700 million in rapeseed oil. We did 600 million in fruit. We did 2.6 billion in beef and veal, 2.3 billion in poultry, 1.3 billion in pork, and 1.1 billion in mutton and lamb. Dairy industry brought in 4.6 billion. These are big numbers, and the UK is a very skilled agricultural country. The UK has 73 protected regional traditional British foods: Cornish pasties, Kentish ale, Jersey Royal potatoes, Stilton cheese, Cumberland sausages, and the list goes on. We export huge quantities of whiskey and salmon and cheese and lamb and various other highly processed products like milk powder and truffles, oysters, natural honey, beer, cider, gin, and the list goes on. The UK has the capability to grow more food than it currently does, and we have an opportunity to do better. Now, the UK supplies 58% of its own food, which means 42% of our food is imported. 23% of our food comes from the EU, and the rest comes from North America, Asia, and Africa, essentially. The three largest commodities that we import is fruit and vegetables, meat and beverages. Yet, we have a massive import shortfall. Apart from beverages, everything else is in deficit. We import a majority of our fruit and vegetables, we import a majority of our meat, we import a majority of our cereals, we import a majority of our tea, coffee, and cocoa, we import our own fish, we import our own dairy and eggs, we import animal feed, we import oils, we import sugars. The UK is very dependent on the international market, and this is an important factor that we have to realise, that a strong country, a strong UK, is able to afford food from other countries. A weak UK is not able to afford food from these international countries, and we need to buy 42% of our food from external sources. Considering we use the smallest amount of land to grow fresh fruit and vegetables, 56% of the fresh vegetables consumed in the UK are produced domestically. However, we can't produce the tropical fruits that we love: bananas, avocados, dates, olives, etc. However, we could produce more of our own tomatoes, cucumbers, and food that we import from the continent if we did a few minor changes to the way the UK economy works. So the origins of fresh fruit is very different to vegetables. In the UK, we only produce 13% of our fruit needs. 26% of it comes from the EU, and 61% of it comes from the rest of the world, which is understandable for our taste for tropical fruits and vegetables. Now, there is a lot of things that we can't, no matter what we do, we can't grow bananas in the UK, and we can't grow avocado pears in the UK. So we'll always import those luxury items. But those are not food security items. And this is the point that I'm trying to focus on here, is food security is not about the luxuries. Food security is about, can we produce enough fresh fruit and vegetables to keep the country healthy? Can we produce enough meat to keep the country healthy? Can we produce enough dairy? And can we produce enough cereals? And can we produce enough grains? And can we produce enough nuts? And all the other things that we need to be healthy, to live balanced lives. And at the moment, we're still not quite there yet. But the problem is, because of globalization, we've never really looked at solving the problem ourselves to make a profit. And there is great opportunities, if we can get our energy infrastructure right, to really revolutionize the growing industry in the UK. You know, we in the UK consume £112 billion a year on food and drink. And 56% of shoppers say they would choose British over foreign produce every time. However, 45% think that British food is more expensive than imported food, and that tends to limit them in their capabilities of purchasing it. What we have to remember is these are very big industries. You know, bread and cereals is like, the UK people alone spend 13.4 billion a year on bread and cereals. You know, we spend 18.7 billion a year on meat. We spend 11.4 billion a year on milk, cheese and eggs, and we spend 7.2 billion a year on fruit and 12.5 billion a year on vegetable. Just for example's sake, for the 12.5 billion a year on vegetable, if we're importing 0.5% of that, that's 6 billion a year going out of the country. So the objective would be is we can grow most vegetables in the right climate controls. We need to make energy cost effective enough so that we can get greenhouses and we can get polytunnels and we can get the agricultural industry geared up, industrialized to grow maximum amount of food. The objective would be to be able to reach 100% of the UK demand plus a 50% to export, grow the economy, create new industries like that, use the green revolution as a springboard to focus on how can we produce and make the world stronger. Food security is one of the most important things we need to be thinking about in this day and age. We have to accept that our economies are built on free trade, and as much trade that we can keep internal, the stronger we are as a country. Now, I'm not saying let's look away from the world. The objective is to create a surplus that we can sell on. We have to become ultra-industrialized in agriculture again. We used to be the powerhouses of the world. What we couldn't grow ourselves, we got from our colonies. And then we brought them home and we added value. And then we sent them back out. But now as the world changes, as climate changes, as the world becomes slightly more unstable, we need to focus on internal, make sure we can produce enough food to keep our nation strong, and at the same time produce more food so we can sell it to the rest of the world, because times are going to get very difficult. In order to remain powerful, we need to come from a place of power. We need to be less, food security is so important, and the UK has huge amounts of food insecurity. Just looking at this map, you can see that, in the northeast, which is my home county, we have between 10 and 11% of households that are food insecure. This should not be happening in the British Isle. This should not be happening in a country that has 71% of its land dedicated to agriculture. We need to focus and double down on creating enough food to make sure that our country can survive and people can eat. That brings me to an end of today's live. And I think it's important we always run down just a quick conclusion of what we've sort of discussed today, and kind of where our thinking is at. So in conclusion, rule by law with small government intervention is potentially the best type of political system. Removing certain institutions from government control will have positive implications for the people and the country. Democracy is not always the best, as we have seen the failures in Scottish independence and Brexit. Decisions like this should not be done in a democratic way. They should be done on a point of the country's need. The UK's Green Revolution is not going to change the world, and it needs to be thought about. The UK Green Revolution is not going to change the world, and we need to think about government's involvement in this issue and how it is not particularly beneficial to us. The UK could increase its emissions to 2% and still not be a major cause of climate change. And lastly, food. We need to produce more food in the UK. And the only way we can do that, we need to grow more food in the UK. And the only way we can do that is to build an energy infrastructure that delivers the cheapest energy possible. And like everything that I do on this experiment, I'm constantly trying to find ways to make things better, constantly trying to increase my understanding of the way the world is working around me, and trying my hardest not to get bogged down by my own prejudices. It is an incredibly difficult task sometimes, especially when you read something that you're quite passionate about in an area or an industry that you're quite passionate about. But my objective and my absolute goal is to open up conversations with people about these topics who wouldn't normally read the book or take time to think about it. And I'm hoping that through these little YouTube videos that I make, I can reach and connect with people who are also thinking about these things and who also want to make life in their world a better place. And over time, with the right amount of effort, I think we'll get this done. So thank you for watching this video today. Until next time, goodbye.